By mid-December, what could have been one of the most decisive victories of the Japanese Empire had turned into one of their most costly defeats. Guadalcanal had effectively turned into an island of death and starvation for the invaders, their strength waning with each passing day. The Marines of General Vandegrift had also suffered the abysmal conditions that Guadalcanal had to offer, yet at this point their victory was complete. Now relieved by army troops of the American Division, the Americans prepared to undertake another offensive against the stranded Japanese to the west. So join us as we delve into the first battle of Mount Austen. Once you're done with this video, we recommend you see some action from elsewhere in the war with the rising star of documentary streaming, our sponsor Magellan TV. In particular, we recommend their Battlefields of the World War series, which covers some decisive battles from the First and Second World Wars, with a focus on uncovering just why they played out as they did. By studying the tactics and technologies involved, the fog of war can be cleared, and the reasons why the fates of whole peoples can be sealed in minutes on the battlefield begin to emerge. If you're liking our Pacific War series, then we definitely recommend you check this one out. And you'll also find the biggest and best collection of other history content on Magellan TV, focusing on the drama of real life and real people taking part in historic events, all done with extremely good quality for the low price of entry, and with good results. It's the highest rated documentary streaming app on Google Play. More than 20 hours of new content is added weekly, 4K options never cost extra, and there's not a single ad to be seen. But don't just keep this to yourself. If there's someone you know who'd love access to this massive library, get them a Magellan TV gift card, an easy and customizable gift that's ideal for the upcoming holiday season, or anytime really. Offering so much content, they're guaranteed to get something special out of it. You can actually get a free trial right now if you use our special link in the description, so you might as well give it a go. As we last saw, the Japanese had been victorious in the Battle of Tassafaronga, successfully re-establishing their dominion of the South Pacific during nighttime. But the Americans had also successfully prevented the invaders from landing their supplies on Guadalcanal, and with a critical food crisis developing on the Death Island, the Japanese needed to continue with their efforts to land their drums full of provisions. On December 3rd, Admiral Tanaka had launched another attempt at this, successfully dumping 1,500 drums off Tassafaronga. Yet American aircraft would then go on to strafe and sink all but 310 of them, leaving only a minimum amount for the stranded Japanese. 4 days later, the third Japanese attempt would surprisingly be turned back by PT boats off Cape Esperance, so the situation in Guadalcanal would turn much more desperate. A submarine would have to be sent again the following night, yet it too would fail against the brave PT boats, as the I-3 got torpedoed and sank as a result, forcing the Japanese to suspend further submarine runs. Thus, on December 8th, as both the submarine and destroyer runs proved to be a failure, the IJN informed a shocked General Imamura that they wanted to stop all transportation runs immediately. Although Imamura would manage to convince Navy officials to launch at least one more destroyer run, the Japanese had already been developing a new plan to replace the Tokyo Express since early November, the chain transportation. Along with the improvement of their facilities at Rabaul, Buin and Shortland, the Japanese wanted to create new air bases closer to Guadalcanal. The most important of the new facilities would be Munda, on the island of New Georgia, where SNLF Marines, 2 anti-aircraft battalions and a rifle battalion had been landed by November 22nd, under the command of Captain Iwabuchi Sanji. IJN officials then envisioned the establishment of 3 bases between Munda and Guadalcanal, with small motor or sailing craft moving at night from one base to the next, where they would be concealed during daylight in hides bristling with anti-aircraft weapons. Wickham Anchorage on the island of Vangunu had been selected as their first base, successfully landing 600 men of the 1st Battalion 229th Regiment on November 27th. But with more than 180 aircraft, the Cactus Air Force now reigned supreme on the Central Solomons, launching air raids to Rakata Bay and Munda and completely thwarting the Japanese plans, as they prevented them from landing equipment and provisions at Wickham. As a result, the chain transportation was rendered unviable, and Munda would be more of a liability than an asset. On December 11th, the last destroyer run would finally be launched, and although Admiral Tanaka would successfully release 1,200 drums off Tassafaronga, only 220 would be received by the starving Japanese. Additionally, 5 PT boats would again attack the destroyers as they started to withdraw, destroying the Teruzuki and injuring Tanaka, who would then be recalled to Japan by the end of December. As a final note, General Imamura counted with 100 operational aircraft by December 7th, and efforts would be made across December to bring more reinforcements and repair damaged planes, with the 6th Air Division starting to arrive on December 18th to add a further 110 aircraft, though the skill of the replacement air crews would be subpar. Meanwhile, with the arrival of the 132nd Regiment on December 8th, General Vandegrift finally turned over command of Guadalcanal to Major General Alexander Patch of the Americal Division. Along with the experienced Marine General, the first echelon of the worn 5th Marines began embarkation, followed by the rest of the division by the end of the month, which had suffered a total of 650 deaths since the start of the campaign. Upon assuming command, Patch acknowledged with General Harmon that they would need to wait for more reinforcements until January to launch their main offensive against the enemy. Nonetheless, he identified that the Japanese were using Mount Austen as a fruitful source of intelligence, so he decided to launch a limited attack to secure Mount Austen as an essential prelude for his January offensive. On the other side, the food crisis that the 17th Army was experiencing left the entire army composed of pale wisps of men, with ulcerous skin draped with filthy clothes, who had to eat tree shoots, coconuts and grass growing in the rivers to survive. Only 30% of the 38th Division retained the strength to fetch rations for their comrades, with a mere 250 men possessing full combat capabilities. The story was the same for the other Japanese units on Guadalcanal, and it was in this severely debilitated condition that they were about to face a new American attack. General Hyakutake feared that a coastal attack in these conditions would decimate his forces, so he instead had been attempting to lure American intention inland by feinting offensive designs and by launching raids into the American perimeter, even though this wasn't necessary because of Patch's intentions. On December 16th, Patch finally ordered the 132nd Regiment of Colonel Leroy Nelson to seize Mount Austen at once. Nelson departed the following day, heading to Hill 35, which constituted a logistical barrier that would require native bearers to hand-carry supplies forward, which would be known as the Cannibal Battalion. By December 18th, Company L had marched about 1,000 yards southwest of Hill 35, and then pivoted left to enter the jungled slopes of Mount Austen, when rifle and machine gun fire fell upon them. Soon the entire 3rd Battalion would be pinned down by the overwhelming Japanese fire. Despite air and artillery bombardments, the Americans would be unable to achieve any progress, and on December 20th, Nelson's forces would have to dig in around Hill 19. During the next few days, Japanese infiltrators would try to harass the supply parties and the engineers on the trail, and American patrols would push 1,500 yards south, though they would fail to find the enemy. On December 23rd, a 3rd Battalion patrol managed to prowl westward as far as Hill 31, and Nelson would order his forces to follow that route and attack south towards Hill 27. The following day, the 3rd Battalion would successfully fight its way to Hill 31, immediately preparing to climb its open grassy slopes. Yet in front of them was the Gifu, a strongly fortified Japanese position sequestered between Hills 31 and 27. Its main line constituted 45 interconnected pillboxes bent into a horseshoe, each housing 1 and sometimes 2 machine guns with 2 or 3 riflemen. The staggered formation of pillboxes permitted mutual supporting fire, and there were also prepared positions in front of the main line for riflemen and light machine gunners. As the Americans tried to climb the slopes of Hill 31, dense machine gun fire from these well-concealed positions abruptly checked them, so Nelson would have to establish a defense perimeter for the night. Another assault would be launched on December 25th, but Japanese fire from invisible outposts would again sting the 3rd Battalion back. Thus, Nelson concluded that he faced a perimeter defense, so he decided to send the 1st Battalion left to penetrate 1,000 yards and find the elusive Japanese flanks. This was a smart move, as the Gifu defenders lacked the strength to man their full defensive perimeter, particularly Hill 27 to the south. Yet in the end, machine gun fire would snag the 1st Battalion's exploration of the left flank. Meanwhile, at a high cost in lives, the 3rd Battalion would launch another unsuccessful frontal assault on December 26th, followed by a holding attack the next day, supported by a flanking maneuver to the left by the 1st Battalion, which met the same outcome as previous assaults. During the next few days, Nelson would continue to patrol the enemy perimeter, looking for gaps and weak spots, and on December 29th, he would at last find a clear route to Hill 27. At this point, he had suffered 313 casualties, and both his battalions were dispirited and physically falling, so he ordered the 2nd Battalion to march to Hill 11 for a planned southwest strike towards Hill 27. On the morning of New Year's Day 1943, the 2nd Battalion reached its jump-off point and at once started its difficult march towards Hill 27, arriving at its objective in the afternoon. At this point, the physically and mentally exhausted Nelson was relieved of his command, getting replaced by Lieutenant Colonel Alexander George, who immediately set out to restore confidence in his dispirited men. By January 2nd, the 3 battalions of the 132nd Regiment were finally ready for their coordinated attack. As the 3rd Battalion encroached into the jungle south of Hill 31, and the 1st Battalion closed up on a line confronting the eastern face of the Gifu, the 2nd Battalion strenuously climbed to the crest of Hill 27, surprising the unsuspecting Japanese and capturing a field piece position. As they dug in to defend their gain, enemy artillery fire began to fall on them, and they would have to repel 6 separate attacks in the afternoon. With night falling, the 2nd Battalion would finally have to pull back to a narrower enclave on the reverse slope of Hill 27. Yet on the next morning, they would fiercely regain their abandoned position at the bare crest. By January 4th, however, the exhausted 3 battalions of the 132nd Regiment were finally ordered to dig in and hold their positions around the Gifu, which had been completely surrounded and couldn't receive any more supplies. After 22 days of fighting at Mount Austen, the 132nd had lost 115 killed or missing, 272 wounded, and hundreds more that were ill with malaria and other tropical diseases, something that rendered the regiment incapable of further offensive action. At the same time, the Gifu defenders had suffered enormous losses as well, and were unable to receive any more supplies, so they would quickly starve to death if they continued to resist. But now we have to depart Guadalcanal to continue with our coverage of the bloody Battle of Buna-gona. With the fall of Gona on December 9th, the forces of Brigadier Doherty now turned west to deal with the fresh troops that had landed with General Yamagata. At this point, the 21st Brigade had lost a total of 409 men, and the 39th Battalion had additionally suffered 121 losses, almost 41% of Doherty's strength, so the Australians would decide to advance with caution against Yamagata. During these days, from positions halfway between Gona and Hadi's village, the debilitated 2nd 14th Battalion would skirmish with the enemy along the coast, while the 39th Battalion moved in to reinforce them. On December 11th, the Australians would also launch a surprise attack across the swamps on the far side of the Japanese line, and although their charge would be eventually halted, several enemy outposts would fall to them and many casualties would be inflicted. A Japanese overnight counterattack managed to recover some of the posts, so Yamagata resolved to secure his current position in the Gona area, wait for the arrival of the second echelon of reinforcements, and plan subsequent strategies. Another attempt at landing the original echelon of the 170th Regiment had actually been carried out on December 8th, but yet again, unchallenged American bombers would force them to withdraw after damaging 3 Japanese destroyers. In the next few days, the 2nd 14th would gradually push the Japanese into their main defences at Hadi's village through some small actions and costly skirmishes, and on December 15th, the 39th would finally arrive at the front, slowly closing in from the west and surrounding Yamagata's men. The following day, as the 2nd 14th was placed under Honor's command, the Australians decided to launch a coordinated assault, successfully capturing some huts on the southeast corner of the village and inflicting many casualties on the enemy. On December 17th, the attackers drew their ring closer still to the Japanese main defences, using a grenade launcher to outright destroy the enemy bunkers. Yet by nightfall, Yamagata would complete his evacuation of Hades village, as he had been orderly evacuating his wounded and supplies since the start of the engagement, only leaving behind a couple of men in hiding and successfully withdrawing to Danewetu. At dawn on December 18th, the Australians then finally swarmed through the village, rapidly overrunning the remaining pockets of resistance as they found little opposition. Now Yamagata knew that he wasn't strong enough to fight his way to Buna through the Australian lines, and as he was under frequent air attack and with the enemy pressing hard, he definitely had to wait until more reinforcements could arrive, which were coming in shortly. On December 14th, the original echelon of the 170th Regiment would finally arrive at the mouth of the Mambari River, covered by bad weather as the poor visibility prevented Allied air attacks. With the soldiers would also come Major General Oda Kensaku, who had been appointed by General Adachi to replace the legendary General Horiyi as commander of the South Seas Detachment. Upon landing, the Japanese got their supplies and barges safely under the cover of the shoreline vegetation. But unbeknownst to them, coast watchers from the Papuan Infantry Battalion would spot them and alert headquarters. Allied aircraft then bombed their supply dumps and constantly harassed the freshly landed troops, forcing them to move by night and delaying Oda's advance to the Amboka River. Oda and Yamagata would finally meet at Danewetu on December 18th, and they would learn of new orders for the landed forces to move to Garua and take charge of the fighting along the Sanananda track. 3 days later, Oda would sail by barge to Garua, where he officially took over command from Colonel Yokoyama. Yamagata, however, remained at Danewetu with his men, resisting the enemy attacks for a few days while he prepared the evacuation of his detachment. On December 26th, the Japanese would finally escape the Gona area and would sail by barge to Garua, thus concluding the Gona front and giving the spent men of the 21st Brigade some well-earned resting time. Moving on to the Buna area, we've left a victorious Abana force occupying Buna village and preparing to subjugate the government station. But another threat still remained at the Triangle and the Coconut Grove, and trying to exploit the physical uplift which followed the capture of the village, General Eichelberger immediately set out to clear these areas. This task was assigned to the scattered 2nd Battalion 128th Regiment, with Lieutenant Colonel Herbert Smith taking a small band of 84 men to attack Coconut Grove on December 16th. Fire swept them in their approach, wounding General Byers among others, but Smith tenaciously continued forward, successfully holding his position during the night under a drenching rain. The next morning, the American attack began, with 3 separate groups coming out of the trees and rapidly overwhelming the Japanese positions. By noon, the grove was in Smith's hands, and with it stocks of food, weapons and ammunition. From there, the Americans would at once cross Entrance Creek to establish themselves firmly on the eastern bank before they were checked. Smith then sent his men against the Triangle on December 19th, but the defenders fiercely resisted their attacks and inflicted many casualties on the Americans. With Byers wounded, Eichelberger had officially assumed command of the 32nd Division, knowing that if he wanted to launch his attack on the government station, he first needed to take care of the 2 threats on his flanks, the Japanese strongholds at the Triangle and Mesita Island. For these tasks, Colonel Tomlinson now received the reinforcement of the 127th Regiment, with its 2nd Battalion immediately relieving the battered 2nd Battalion 128th Regiment, and its 3rd Battalion doing the same with the 2nd Battalion 126th Regiment. On December 18th, the 3rd Battalion had first gone into action as it crossed into Mesita unopposed, but eventually it would be driven back in disorder by strong Japanese fire. The following day, Tomlinson also sent his battalion to attack the Triangle after a heavy air bombardment, but the defenders inflicted many casualties on the Americans as they attempted to cross the bridge. As another attempt to clear out the Triangle on December 20th failed yet again, and no progress had been made in 3 days, Tomlinson would be replaced by Colonel Gross as commander of Urbana Force. Eichelberger and Gross now had decided to bypass and isolate the Triangle, secure Mesita Island as a staging point for an assault on the mission, and directly attack the northwest end of the government gardens. Next week, however, we'll return to the India-Burma region to cover some new developments that were transpiring as the British prepared to launch their first Arakan campaign. So make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Kings and Generals channel, and we will catch you on the next one.